Vinayak, we will start now. All right. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Team Cliniminds, I would welcome you to this International Clinical Trials Day celebration today. It's a very important day for all of us who are in the domain of pharmaceutical industry, in the clinical trial industry. It's a day which is being celebrated, although the clinical trials go back hundreds of years, in some form or the other. There is this day is being celebrated at least for the last 20 years now. Since 2005 was the first time. That was the time Cliniminds was about 1 year old at that time. We are now 20-year plus organization established in the year 2004. So we remember since 2005, the Clinical Trials Day, International Clinical Trials Day is being celebrated. This International Clinical Trials Day is to, in fact, commemorate the day of in the 1747 when Dr. James Lind first time, he conducted the formal clinical trial on board HMS Salisbury, testing the treatments for the scurvy amongst the sailors. And that was the first time the formal, clinical trial, in a sense, was conducted. But then there were a lot of learnings from the history. There were a lot of incidents in the history, Nazi illegal, testing of the patients, and there were many other accidents and the incidents in the history which taught us more about clinical trials and how we should actually conduct the clinical trials more ethically in line with the regulations. Then came the ICGCP principles in the 90s. The ICGCP principles, the objective was to bring the harmonization amongst the regulations. And that set today the platform for all the global clinical trials. So whether you conduct the clinical trials in India or US, Europe, UK, Japan, or any other country, ICGCP principles form the backbone of the clinical trials. ICGCP principles, along with the local regulations, set the basics for the clinical trial regulations worldwide. In India, we have our own the principles, GCP principles in India. We follow the ICGCP principles. We also have our own clinical trial regulations, New Drug Clinical Trial Rules 2019. Even the basis of all these regulations, the fundamentals comes from the ICGCP. So today on this day, we would like to first of all thank all our stakeholders. Thank you to the government, to our regulators in India and worldwide, to set the rules, lay down the principles, lay down the regulations for ethically, scientifically conducting the clinical trials. Also, we would like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, the pharmaceutical companies or the research agencies who invest, billions of dollars into the research and help, in the countering the diseases, developing the new treatments, new drugs, new devices, new vaccines. And we saw how we actually worked during the COVID together and brought out the vaccination from India. So that was a big success story from India, how we were able to develop Indian-made vaccine for our population. And that, I think, gave a lot of confidence to the Indian industry. And today, as a result, if you see, today India contributes significantly to the global clinical trials industry, global drug development, vaccine development, medical device developments in the last 5 years have been the tremendous journey for India in this space. We should also thank to all the colleagues in industry, whether they are in the positions as the managers, as the research coordinators, as the CRAs, our PIs, principal investigators who uh, do these studies on the site. So would like to extend the thanks to all. But most of all is the patient population, the subject population. The subject population is very important because without the subject participation is not possible. They have to participate. If they participate in the ethical clinical trials, the trials which are conducted ethically, the subject population brings so much credibility to the clinical trials. And would like to extend the warm thanks to the subject population patients as well. And hopefully with the more stable regulations, more ethical conduct of clinical trials, you will see more and more patient subjects participating in this clinical trials. Today, I would also like to welcome my colleague Shweta Gujral. Shweta, if you could come on the screen, change your screen, maybe. Yeah. So Shweta, I'd like to give you a brief introduction. Shweta comes with over 15 years experience in the clinical trials industry and heads the academics at the Cliniminds. So today's session on the ICH GCP principles and what are the revisions, the new version, the R3 amendment which has come. Shweta will take us through the entire GCP and R3, the changes, what are the differences between the R2 and R3, and how the globally it is being implemented now, R3 implementation. And so before I hand over to Shweta, thanks to our sponsor Cliniminds for this particular event. Cliniminds, as you may be aware, is a life sciences sector focused training and skilling institution for the last 20 years. We have trained, placed over 12,000 plus students, professionals across the globe, and we offer the end-to-end training solutions in clinical trials, pharmacovigilance, data management, regulatory, medical and scientific writing, medical devices, and across the spectrum of the global pharma industry. And all of you at this end of the workshop would also receive the presentation of Cliniminds. Will mail you the presentation. And if any students who have any participants have any requirement of any programs, they need more information, our team will be happy to connect with you. Also, at the end of this webinar by Shweta ma'am, we will open the chat window for your questions. And also please write your email ID and WhatsApp number. In the next few days, you will receive the participation certificate of this workshop today, what we're going to go through. So at the end, please post your email ID and WhatsApp numbers. And in the next 4 to 5 days, you will receive your participation certificate. So over to you, Shweta ma'am, for the rest of the proceedings.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So on behalf of Cliniminds, I extend a warm welcome to all of you. So on this great occasion, I am really happy to share the updates related to the GCP. So now I'll be sharing my screen and giving you the overview of how the GCP evolved and currently what we are doing and the new things that are being implemented in I3 and 3. Those details we will be talking about. So just wait a minute, I'll be sharing the screen. Okay. So let's start with the ICH GCP. So coming to the basic definition, that what is GCP? So GCP stands for Good Clinical Practice. So till now, we know that the GCP talks about the bedrock ethical as well as the scientific standards that how the trial needs to be conducted. So why these standards are important to be followed? Because this in the clinical trials, we are involving the human participants. So whenever the humans are being involved, a lot of regulations are need to be followed. A lot of ethics need to be followed. So why we talk about the ethics, that I'll be explaining in the upcoming slides. So when the GCP was being developed, the objective was to make sure that all the participants who are taking part in the clinical trials, they are safe, they know about their rights in the trials, and they are doing well in the trial to take care of their health condition as well, was one of the priority, one of the objective. Apart from that, all the data that we are going to collect, all the clinical trial information that we are going to collect should be complete, should be accurate. So that was the main objective why the GCP was being framed and why it is so important to follow the GCP in the clinical trials. So till now, as per the ICH GCP revision 2, we know that the GCP gave us the ethical as well as the scientific standards that how the clinical trial needs to be designed, conducted, performed, monitor, audit, recording, analysis, and how to prepare the final report, making sure that the subject safety and the quality of the data is not being compromised. So the subject safety comes first in the clinical trial. So in the revision 3, what we are expecting is there is a bit revision to the definition of ICH GCP. Now the GCP standard says that it is from the planning stage onwards. When we are designing the trial from that time point onwards, we need to evaluate what are the critical processes, what are the critical data that we need to collect and how it's going to impact the safety as well as the quality of the data. So from the planning stage onwards, the GCP needs to be followed while we are initiating the trial, we are performing the trial related activities, we are recording the data. Now in this revision 3, the data recording has been a major part because now we are getting the data, not just the paper-based data, not just limited to the CRF. Now we have different sources for getting the trial data. So that is one of the main focus in the GCP revision 3. Plus the supervision, that is the oversight, that is important part that is being revised in the revision 3, talking about how the activities related to the trial will be supervised by the sponsor as well as by the investigator. And how the analysis of the data will be done, how the final reports will be written. And towards the data, earlier it says that the reports should, the data that is collected should be credible and accurate. So this is now being replaced with the terminologies that the data and reports should be reliable. And the right safety and well-being, that is always the priority of any clinical trials. So that remains intact. So with this objective, let's go in to the history first before going into the comparison that what was there, what was new that is being added to the revision ICH. So when we talk about the clinical style trials that have been in the past when it started, so we just had the Food and Drug Act in 1906. And this regulation just talk about more about how to prepare a good quality of drug, manufacturing of the drug. That was the area that was being more focused on. But the trials were being conducted and there was a lot of tragedies. Like you can see, the sulfanilamide tragedy happened, and after that, the Nazi human experiment, this was the another tragedy that happened. Then comes the thalidomide, then comes the syphilis study. And after every tragedy, you can see there was some codes or some principles like the Nuremberg Code, which came in the 1948 Declaration of Helsinki, and Belmont Report. So these are all the ethical principles that was being implemented for protecting the human participants in the result. So it's just an overview. Let's go into the details in the slides. So when we talk about the Nazi human experiments, which are also known as Nuremberg trial, or also referred to as the Nazi doctors trial. So what happened exactly in the Nazi experiment is that there were 27 Nazi doctors, and these doctors, this experiment was being carried out after World War II. So all the prisoners who were in the jail, mainly the Jewish people, were being taken into this trial, and there were 27 team of doctors, these Nazi doctors. They took these patients, these prisoners, into the research without taking their consent, whether they are willing to participate in the trial or not. And they exposed them to the brutal conditions like putting them under the low oxygen level, putting them in the ice cold conditions, injecting the injecting with the sulfur injections, which leads to the blister all over their bodies and lead to the poisoning, and lot of death occurs because of these brutal incidences that took place in the Nazi experiment. So this trial was then being taken to the court, and the law says that no, this whatever was being done in the trial, that is not ethical, that is not acceptable. So there should be some ethical principles that needs to be implemented when any trial is being conducted. So why we call it as Nuremberg trial? Because this trial was being conducted in the city of Nuremberg, that is in Germany. So that's why it is also known as Nuremberg trial. So this Nuremberg trial came after this trial. There was a Nuremberg Code. The 10 ethical principles were being formed. The focus of these principles were that all the participants who are taking part in the clinical trial, their participation should be voluntary. We should not force any of the participants to take part in the trial if they are not willing, and the trial should only be initiated if we have sufficient data that the benefits in the research is going to be overweighing the risk that is associated with the trial. So the trials that the data, the scientific material or the data which says that this trial is having more risk, those type of trials shouldn't be carried out, because in the trial we don't want the subject to be suffering from any sort of physical or mental disabilities or injuries. So then there was one more right that was being given to the subject, that if suppose the consent is being given, the patient permits that they consent that they really want to participate in the trial, but once they become the part of the trial, they are not very okay, and they feel that no, this trial is not going to benefit, it's not benefiting me, or there are lots of side effects that I'm facing. That the right is being given to the subject that they can leave the study at any time point. There is no legal action, there's no penalty that will be imposed on them. So with this basic, the 10 principles in the Nuremberg Code came in the year 1948. Then what happened then leads to the revision of these Nuremberg principles. There was one more tragedy that took place, which was the thalidomide tragedy that shook the whole world. So what exactly happened? So what exactly happened in this was the thalidomide drug was being used. Sorry, so I just came. So the thalidomide drug was being used. So this thalidomide drug was again being prepared in Germany itself, and this drug was being used for treating the epilepsy, morning sickness without being testing for the toxicity, as well as not much elaborated trials were being conducted for related to this drug, and this drug was being prescribed, and this drug was doing quite well in case of epilepsy and sedatives, in insomnia cases and morning sickness cases. But eventually, what happened when the pregnant females were suffering from the morning sickness? They were going to the doctors to ease their morning sickness. In that case, the thalidomide drug was also being prescribed to them without being tested whether it is being safe for the pregnant females or not. So because of that, when these females delivered the children who were born with the condition of phocomelia. So phocomelia is what the underdeveloped limbs. You can see in the picture the underdeveloped limbs in the case of children. So a lot of it's around 10,000 children were born with a condition of leukaemia. Then this tragedy was the main reason for having more robust system of testing and to look for the safety of the subject. Then after this, there was one more incident that took place, that was a syphilis study. In the syphilis study, what happened, this trial took place in America, and in this trial, the black men were being taken. So what exactly happened in this trial was being against the patients who were suffering from the syphilis disease. So it was not their own mens, but the black men's were being taken in this trial, and the penicillin was the solution was for treating the syphilis disease condition. But they didn't tell these black men who participated in the trial that there is such treatment with the help of which the syphilis condition can be cured. That was not being revealed to the patient. And the patient was being told that if you participate in the trial, you will be getting the treatment and your condition can be cured. So what exactly they did, these doctors did, they didn't provided any treatment for the syphilis to these patients. And they just did this trial to have an understanding that what causes the syphilis disease, how it progresses, and eventually how it leads to death. To study the progression of the disease, the black men were being taken into the trial, and all the participants who took part in the trial eventually lost their life. So after having these big tragedies, there was a need to do the revision to the ethical guidelines that was being developed. And most of the principles that we see in the Declaration of Helsinki, that is the guideline talking about the ethical principles. So there are 12 ethical principles in the Declaration of Helsinki, which came in the year 1964. So these principles are still a part of the protocol, and we still follow the principles, and it is a part in the ICAGC as well. So when with this Declaration of Helsinki guidelines was being developed, all the 10 principles that was being covered in the Nuremberg Code was also being incorporated, and the Declaration of Helsinki guideline came up with the 12 ethical principles. So this was being adopted by the World Medical Association, and this guideline talking about the ethics is the cornerstone document on human researches. So let's see what was the focus of the Declaration of Helsinki guidelines. The main focus are on these 4 principles, which were being further elaborated into the 12 principles in the guideline. So the first principle talks about the justice, that every participants who are taking part in the trial, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless whether they belong to the privileged group of people or underprivileged, or their own men's or from different countries, everyone who participated in the trial should be treated equally, fairly, and all the risk that involved in the trial should be shared by all the participants, and all the benefits should also be shared by all the participants who are taking part in the trial. Then the second main principle was the beneficence. Beneficence talks about that the trial should have maximum benefit and the minimum risk, then only the trial needs to be initiated. So if the trial says the risk is higher and the benefits are low, those type of trials shouldn't be entertained or approved to be carried out. The third basic principle was non-maleficence, which says do not harm. So in the trial, we should not harm the human participant. That should be our priority from the from the time we are designing the trial till the final publication or till the final report of the study is being prepared. The subject's right, the subject protection should be the priority. Then comes the respect or autonomy. This is the right of the subject, that and the informed consent is one of the way of showing the respect and letting the subject know what the trial is all about, and how the subjects can protect themselves by letting them know about their rights by taking the informed consent, which is one of the very important part in the clinical trials. And if it is not being carried out in a proper standard manner, it can even suspend or terminate the trials. When talking about the vulnerable group of people, the people who cannot think about their own interests or they cannot protect their own interests, there are special regulations that needs to be special principles or special protection that needs to be provided in their case. So this was the history from which finally we came up to the ICH GCP. And the motive, the why the ICH was being formed was that in the past, when the trials were being done, the regulators, the regulatory authorities, to whom the industrialists, the sponsors who were submitting the data, the regulatory authority was not always satisfied. They have some or the other issues with the data that is being submitted, and there was a repetitive submissions again and again by the industrialists, and the regulators are also tired of reviewing the same application again and again. So what they did is like the regulators and the industry people came together and they said, let's form an association, which was known as ICH. It's an non-profitable association. And in this, the regulatory authority members, the industrialists participated. They are equal partners. And they came up with the standards. They discussed that what should be the scientific and technical areas that needs to be considered, and as per the regulatory authorities, what standards they need to follow while they are manufacturing the drug or testing the drug, how what are the parameters that needs to be evaluated for saying that the drug is effective working under the disease condition, and how to manufacture the drug. Keeping these three areas in mind, the ICH was being developed, and the ICH works on the four modules. So first is the safety module, second is the efficacy module, third is the quality module, and fourth is the multidisciplinary. The areas does not fit well in the safety, efficacy, and quality will be covered under the multidisciplinary, like the softwares that we are using, the medical dictionaries that is being used, the medical coding details, all covers under the medical, this multidisciplinary section or the module of the ICH. So the ICH guidelines is a part of the efficacy module that comes under E6. So let's see about how, so we know about the history, how from where the ICH was being evolved. Now let's focus on that, how many revisions are now. So currently the revision 3 is out in ICH. So before that, there was revision 2 and revision 1. So revision 1 is the original E6 that was being developed in the year 1996, but was being implemented in the year 1997. So when the ICH GCP guideline came, the original document of ICH came, all the trials were paper-based, and all the rules or the principles that was being included were considering the document as a paper-based, and accordingly, the responsibilities and the data collection guidelines was being released. So in the original guideline, it talks about the investigator, talks about the sponsor, and what are the expectations from different parties who are conducting the clinical trials, talking about the monitoring, reporting, archiving of the clinical trials. So archiving is retaining of the document after completion of the trial. Talks about the essential documents that the essential documents are the important trial document in which we get the information about the trial. So before the trial start, there are certain documents, like the 20 documents that needs to be in place before the trial is initiated. During the trial, as the trial progress, we need to have minimum 25 documents that should be present in the regulatory binders. And then after completion, there are minimum 8 documents that should be present in the regulatory binders that needs to be maintained in order to stay compliant with the ICH GCP guideline. And it talks about the investigator brochure. A brochure is a document which gives us the information, and this brochure gives us the information about investigational product. So this all was being included in the 8th section of the ICH GCP revision 1. That was the original guideline of ICH. Then later we came up with the revision 2 that focused that from when we came towards the revision 2, there was a need to do the modification. Why? Because we were in the world where the technology was evolving fast. So there was a need to upgrade the trials to make the trials more efficient. So to introduce the technology to have the risk-based monitoring objective, the revision 2 came in the year 2016. And yeah, so let's see what was exactly being introduced in the revision 2. So this was the original guideline of ICH. So we can see that it has been divided into 8 sections. When the revision was being done, the revision 2, the amendment was being done to the original guideline, the areas that was being revised was the glossary, which talks about the definition terminologies that are being covered in the guideline. Then the principle of ICH GCP, there was some updates to the principles. That were 13 basic principles that we followed till now as per the ICH GCP revision 2. Then the investigators sponsored essential documents. These were the areas where the changes was being made. And now, recently, on 6th January 2025, with the ICA GCP revision 3 is being implemented. And moving forward, we now need to follow the new structure, the new guidelines, new updates that is being added to the revision 3. So before going into the revision 3 updates, let's see what were the shortcomings of the revision 2 that leads to the emerging, or there was a need to come to the revision 3. So in the year 27, the ICH reflection paper highlighted that the revision 2 did not fully address the diversity of participants, risk level, and the trial design. Then it talked about that with the evolution of the clinical trial ecosystem, it was not well reflected in this guideline. So what we are talking about in the clinical trial ecosystem is we are mainly focusing on the responsibility that the stakeholders hold. We are talking about the processes in the clinical trial, and we are talking about the new technologies like now we have AI tools, we have EHR, electronic health records through which the data can be collected. So that was not well explained and it's not being implemented by the revision 2. That was one of the shortcomings, and there was a lack of proportionality. So what is proportionality in the risk-based approach that I'll be talking about in the upcoming slides? Then the third reason was one size fit all approach that was not applicable in case of different kind of trial. This means that with one single approach, we cannot carry out different kind of trials. So that was one of the shortcomings. Like in the case of public health emergency, in the case of pandemic, these guidelines was found to be challenging to be implemented. And in some areas where it is not being required or it was not found to be very applicable. So these were the reason why the revision 2 is now being replaced with the revision 3 guidelines. So talking about the revision 3. Okay, so in the revision 3, what has been enhanced in the guidelines? So it provides the clarity on scope. So I'll be going through all these points in the upcoming slides. So let's just have a quick overview of this. So clarity on scope, fitness for the purpose, quality by design, proportionate risk-based approach. So these are the new things that are being added in revision 3. Then with the innovation of the technology, there's a need to do the updates in the clinical trial to make the clinical trial more efficient. Now we have AI tools, we have different technologies that are being used in the clinical trials. Like in US and Europe, they are planning to start the monitoring with the AI. So how that this guideline will be fitting well in those. So those are the things that needs to be looking into and to be found to be interested in. So a lot of revision, the complete structure has been revised. So let's see what are the new details. So when we focus on the revision 3, we see that the areas where the ICH GCP Revision 3 guidelines will be implemented is for all the investigational drugs, investigational clinical trials that needs to be submitted to the regulatory authorities. These guidelines will be implemented. Apart from that, the trials in which the submissions to the regulatory authority is not intended, in that case, um, what in this guideline will still be applicable. So this means that whether we are submitting data to the regulatory authority or we are not submitting, we are doing the trial for the academic purpose, not for selling the product in the market. The principles of GCP will be applicable as per the revision 3. So if you talk about India, in India, whether we do the trials that needs to be for the purpose of the commercial trial or we do the academic trial. In both the cases, we are bound as per the regulations of India. We need to follow the principles that are being stated in the GCP. So coming to the key concept of fitness for purpose is being referred to as the quality in the revision 3 guidelines, which says that the fitness for purpose is to meet the purpose for which the activity is being performed, the quality needs to be maintained. So the purpose for which we do the clinical trial is to have the reliable information, to answer the research question, to take the decision, and to protect the human participants. So this is why, this is the main reason why we conduct the clinical trial. So fit for purpose approach, you will see in the guidelines goes well in the protocol. So when we are preparing the protocol, the fit for purpose objective of meeting the quality should be implemented. This means that whenever we are performing any activity, we need to analyze that whether this activity is meeting the purpose for which it is being done. So like the data acquisition tool, this is new in the revision 3, which talks about the different tools that can be used for collecting the data. Okay, so now the data is no more paper-based. We are using the electronic systems, and the wearable devices also comes under the data acquisition tool, with the help of which we are collecting the trial data. So all this we'll be talking about in details in the upcoming slides. And the service providers are so now it's like the service providers, like when we talk about earlier, the CROs. So now the CROs will be called as the service providers. All the vendors will be called vendors, CROs, and any services that the sponsor takes from the other parties, those parties will be referred to as service providers. So instead of using CROs, we'll be using the term service providers. So how their activities or the process that they are going to perform will meet the objective of the study, will meet the quality standards of the trial, needs to be taken care of. So you will see the fit for purpose, that is the quality needs to be taken care in all these areas and the activities wherever it is being performed. So coming to the quality by design talks about that when we are designing, we know that throughout the trial, we need to maintain the quality of the trial. So quality of the trial will start from very beginning of the trial. So first, when we are designing the trial, we need to look into that what is the critical area, that critical data, critical processes that we will be performing, and how the quality of the data will be impacted. So for that, we need to consider the quality factors. So what are quality factors? Quality factors are the attributes of the clinical trials. So we focus that on the protection of the participants, reliability of the trial data, and the decision making based on the trial results. So these are the quality factors that we need to consider. So I'll explain you this with the help of the example. So once we have covered the risk proportionate approach, I'll be going to that as well in detail with examples. So proportionate risk-based approach. So risk-based approach we are already aware of in the revision 2 also. We know that as per the risk-based approach, the trial-related activities were being performed. So what is proportionate? So when we talk about the proportionate, we are talking about the areas where the resources can be better utilized. Like when we talk about the risk in the trial, we say that the risk that we need to evaluate will be related to the subjects, or the subjects will no longer be used the term, so we'll be using the trial participants, and then the results that we are collecting. So these are the areas where we need to evaluate the risk. So for doing the trial, as we were earlier also doing, we need to do the evaluation that what kind of data we need to collect from the trial. For getting that data, what are the processes that will be performed. So related to that data, what are the risks that will be related to the subject, related to the quality of the data, and related to the processes, what are the risks to the subject and what are the risks to the data that will be collected, was the area that needs to be looked into. So in this, now what happened is, once we have evaluated the risk, we know that this is the risk related to the subject, this is the risk related to the data that we are going to collect in the study. We need to do the classification of the risk. We need to see that how severe the risk is, whether the risk is mild or less important, or the risk is okay. So we'll see whether the risk is minimal, or the risk is moderate, or the risk is high. So as the way we categorize the risk, accordingly, the services, the resources, the facilities will be diverted. Means if we say that in the study, the risk is low, okay, so that areas, the resources, like we have the clinical trial team, we are into the monitoring, we are supervising the activities, and we are using the technologies, the systems who can early predict the risk in the studies, and accordingly we can mitigate those risks. So now, as per the requirements, so if the risk is towards the higher side, those area requires more vigilance. Like let's understand with the help of these examples. So we say that the quality factors. So for having like this, these are the areas that can affect the quality of the data. So in randomization, blinding, or we talk about the data collection. So now what we are going to see, we will see what are the risks related to collecting these type of data or performing these type of activity at the process level, as the data level, what are the risks. So first we are going to evaluate the risk, and accordingly we are going to do the proportionate monitoring, proportionate evaluation. So if the risk is high, those areas need to be consistently monitored, and the areas in which the risk is less, the less supervision is required. That is what the proportionate or risk-based, the concept that is being introduced in this. So as per the requirement of the vigilance or the supervision, the resources, the technology will be diverted. So area where the more risk is there, in those areas, more frequent supervision or consistent supervisions, and the monitoring by the systems, AI tools can be implemented so that we can control those risks and we can mitigate, we can reduce the risk. Like if we talk about the randomization, that is important for having the critical data collection in the study for maintaining the quality of the trial. So in that case, we need to see whether if this is the data that we want, how much risk is associated, or what can be the risk. So risk can be, if the system is not validated, the quality that we are expecting can be compromised. So in that case, how we can mitigate that risk by validating the IRT system so it is error-free and the results are of good quality. Talking about the blinding, the investigator do not have the access for the IRT system to be performed unblinding. So suppose in the trial, if any serious adverse event occurs and we need to do the unblinding. So for that, the IRT system should provide the access. So if in case that risk comes up, we need to find out how to mitigate that. So in order to control that risk, we will in a timely manner keep on accessing whether the investigator is having the access for the IRT system. So if in case any SE occurs, the investigator can promptly do the unblinding to find out what is the cause. Then the data collection and handling talks about that the data. Suppose the data is being collected by the patient in the patient reported outcome. Suppose we gave the patient, we are doing the trial in which we maybe some related to orthopedic trials in which the patient need to evaluate or score their pain. For that, we have provided the patient with the device. It can be or a document in which the PROs in which they are going to give their own inputs by themselves without the supervision or without the involvement of the investigator. So in that case, we need to see whether the document is in the language which is being easily acceptable by the patient. So the patient has a good understanding, because if they don't, then we can compromise with the accuracy and quality of the data. So in those cases, the risk need to be categorized, and accordingly the risk mitigation strategies should be in place so that those risks don't outbreak. So these are the key things that are being included in the revision 3. So now let's see the structure of revision 3, which is being completely revised. So before, so this we have seen that this is now the revision 1 guideline, revision 2 guideline talks about the 8th section, and now we have a complete new structure. So if we see the structure of E6R3, the first we have the introduction section, followed will be the principles of ICH GCP. So earlier in the guideline till revision 2, we have 13 principles in the ICH GCP. So now these principles are being made 11. So now in the revision 3, we are expecting, or we are going to follow the 11 ICH GCP principles. Then in the earlier, like the revision 2, we talked about the IRB in section 3. Now the IRB is being included in the Annex 1. The investigator was in the section 4. Now the investigator responsibilities being covered in Annex 2. Annex 1, it's a 2 point. Then coming to the sponsor is also under the Annex 1, and now the data governance. So this is new that is being added in the revision 2. So this is quite interesting that how the data can be managed well in the trial. Now we are getting the data from different sources, not just limited to the CRFs. So how that data will be collected, reviewed, so a lot more to learn in the data governance, which is a new section that is being added in the revision 3, which talks about the investigators and the sponsors' responsibilities related to the data governance. Then comes the appendices, in which we have appendices A, appendix ABC, including the investigators' brochure, which was earlier the section 7, and then talking about the appendix B, talking about the protocol, which was earlier the section 6 of ICH GCP, and in the revision 3, the essential documents, which was the last and 8th section of the ICH revision 2, is being covered under Appendix 6. Then we have the glossary, the definitions that are being covered in the GCP guideline. That was earlier the first section of ICH GCP. So complete restructuring is being done for the ICH GCP revision 3. The next year 2 is still under the public consultation. And I think by the mid of this year, we are going to expect the revision to be in the implementation phase, and we will be having the details about the annexure 2. So annexure 2 is mainly focusing on decentralized elements. So that is also more detail that has been added in the revision 2 about the decentralized elements of talking about the real world data that we are collecting. So that was not earlier included in the clinical trials, but now the real world data, how to consider that to be the part of protocol, all that is being covered will be covered in detail in the Annex 2. So coming to the principles. So just a minute. Okay, so now talking about the principles of ICA GCP. So earlier we said that there were 13 principles. So now it is being changed into 12 principles. So what does this mean? That 12 principles are being removed? No, that is not the case. All the 13 principles are there, plus the 2 new principles related to the risk proportionality and the roles and responsibilities are also being added. So all the 13 principles are being rearranged, and all the 13 principles that was there in the revision 2 are being covered in the revision 3 as well. Plus, we also cover the 2 new principles, talking about the principle 7, the risk proportionality, and talking about the principle 10, which is on the roles and responsibility related to the sponsors and the investigator. So let's focus on the first principles of revision 3, which says that the clinical trial should be conducted in accordance with the ethical principles that have their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki. So that was there already in the revision 2 as well. So we know that when the clinical trials are being conducted, all the ethical principles that have their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki guidelines, focusing on the 12 ethical principles, need to be implemented along with following the other scientific standards in the GCP guidelines and following the regulatory requirement that needs to be followed within the country. So clinical trials should be designed and conducted in the way. So all the trials, the objective of the ICA-GCP, we know, is to protect the right, safety, and well-being of the subject. So keeping that objective as the most important priority, all the trial-related activities need to be performed. So in this, what is new that is being added is in the timely manner this we were doing earlier as well. All the information was being explained to the subject related to the trials, and the review of the safety information was being done in a timely manner. So what is now being added new to this is earlier we said that the physicians, the dentists are being, if the trial is being conducted for any dental procedures, then PI will be the dentist. And the qualification for the qualified physician or the dentist should be at least the postgraduate. So, and these were the investigators who were responsible for providing the overall medical care and providing the medical decision to the participants in the research. So now it says that apart from the investigators, the dentists, the other qualified healthcare professionals will also be responsible, like the research nurses, like the pharmacists, like the other healthcare practitioners will also be responsible for providing the medical care to the subject. So coming to the principle number 2, which talks about informed consent. And informed consent, a lot of new things are being implemented in the revision 2. So what the informed consent we know is one of the most important process in the clinical trial, which we cannot compromise. If it is being compromised or it is being neglected, it can lead to suspension and even termination of the trial. And the data is being that whatever is being collected in the trial will be discarded and not accepted by the regulatory authority. So the informed consent is one of the way of protecting the participants in the research. That it is the regulation part of the regulation as well, that if you want to conduct the trial, the consent needs to be taken. So the clinical trial participants should be participating in the trial, and their participation should be voluntary. So we should not force any of the participant to be taking part in the trial. It's their own wish. If they want to participate in the trial, they can. If not, it's completely fine. There's no penalty. There is no legal action that will be taken against them, and there is no or standard care that they will not be allowed to be availing. So based on the consent process, so one more thing that is being added in the informed consent, that we know earlier that the complete consent process need to be carried out in a verbal discussion, followed will be the document sharing, and then question and answers were being asked, and the subject should be satisfied to their level of satisfaction. Then only the subject should give consent. So if in case of the subject, maybe because of some mental incapabilities or the participant cannot give the consent. So in that case, we said that their legal acceptable representative can give the consent, thinking what is best for the interest of the participants, they can give the consent. But to this, now it says that the participant should also be informed, maybe by their legal acceptable representative, in the manner that they understand why they are participating, why they are being the part of the trial. So earlier, if LAR has given the consent, the subject used to participate in the trial. But now it is important that if the participant cannot give the consent, at least they should be told what the trial is all about to the level of understanding that they have. So that is important to be taken care of while the consent process is being conducted. The process and information needs to be evaluated. This all we already know, that the informed consent should give the complete information, like what are the benefits, risks, what are the burdens that the participants need to be carrying for the interest of the society and for the people. The subject should know the informed consent. All the elements of the informed consent should be explained in a very simple language, and the informed consent document should be in a very simple language and in the language that is being, in the vernacular language that is being understandable by the subject. So in the case of emergency, how the informed consent will be carried out by the subject's LAR will be as per the process that is being approved by the IR. So coming to the third principle of ICA GCP Revision 3 talks about the IRB and IEC review. So the periodic review of the clinical trial by the IRB and IEC. So this is nothing new. We already know that in the section of IRB, this was already included, that the periodic review of the trial should be done by the IRB. But now this is being pulled up as one of the principles in the ICA GCP Revision 3. The revision, the principle 4 talks about the sites. So earlier we said that the clinical trial should be scientifically sound, and the trial should talk about all the information related to the scientific knowledge before we conduct the trial. This means that before we start the trial, we should have the sufficient information. We should have the sponsor should do a lot of journal searches, have collected a lot, to go through the research papers, collect all the information, go through the details about if that trial is already being done in the foreign lands, or if the product is already launched in the country, in some other country, what the marketing experience says. All those information was being collected, and then this proposals were being written, and then that is one being submitted. Now here it says that this information, whatever we have, current information, that information should also be periodically reviewed. Okay, so the proposal is being sent. We started with the trial because once the trial is being initiated, maybe there are some anticipated issues that arises that should also be reviewed, and accordingly the changes should be done to the trial requirements. Talking about the fifth principle that talks about the qualified individual. So earlier we talked about the qualification of the investigators, right? The qualification, we said the investigator should be holding the master's degree, at least should be qualified in terms of their training, experience, and knowledge. But this principle is also applicable for the qualification of the sponsors. The So this will be applicable not just for the investigators, but also for the sponsors. The principle number 6 talks about the quality. So the quality needs to be as per the fitness for purpose that we have just studied earlier in the slides. And accordingly, we need to review, we need to set up the strategies that how we can avoid, detect, address, and prevent occurrence of any non-compliances in the study, which can compromise with the quality of the data. Then coming to the seventh principle, talks about the risk proportionality. So this we also discussed that the processes, the data that needs to be collected. First, we need to find out what are the risks at the subject level, at the data collection level. Accordingly, those risks need to be categorized, whether it's mild, moderate, and high. Accordingly, the resources, the technology should be diverted. So with the help of this proportionality principle, the trials are going to be more efficient and the manpower, the resources that we are using in the trial can be used in a more efficient manner. The requirement, where the requirement is high, the risk is high. At that places, the more efficient and more workforces are required, and the technology is required, and the areas which required mild or moderate, the review will be there, but more focus will be on the areas where the risk is higher. So we can mitigate those risks. We have the strategies to mitigate those risks. Coming to the principle number 8 talks about the protocol. So the protocol should be described in a clear, concise, scientifically sound, and operational feasible protocol. So we know that when we are conducting the trial, the protocols are well defined, well explained, gives each and every information about the activities that will be carried out in the trial, how the subjects will be protected, plus how the data will be collected, what our procedures will be. So here it talks about that all the information that we are going to collect in the protocol should be more detailed, and the information that we get from the real world elements, that information can also be included in the protocol. Now, to give more clarity to the chart. Then coming to the principle number 9, which talks about the reliable results. So how do we know that the data that we have collected during the clinical trial should be the reliable? The results should be reliable, otherwise the results will not be accepted. The product will not be getting the marketing authorization and the product cannot be launched. So for that, the more efficient and robust system should be for managing the records, that how the records will be maintained and how we need to maintain the records with limited access, so the data cannot be modified by the unauthorized members. All the data needs to be kept securely and to be reviewed in a timely manner. Plus, one more thing that is being we are following in India, that when the trials are being conducted, so we don't need to worry much about it, but for the other regions of the country, other countries, maybe this practice is not very common. So like once the trials are being given the approval by the regulatory authority, we know that before we initiate those trials at the trial site, we need to get those trials registered in the registry. In India, we use the Clinical Trial Registry of India, the CTRI. So before we initiate or before we start taking the participants in the trial, it is mandatory for that trial that got the approval, that got the NOC from the regulatory authorities to be conducted. So those trials need to be registered. If not registered in India, we know that the data won't be accepted by the regulatory authority, and the result, the product cannot be launched in the market. So this timely registration of the trial and timely updating the database. So whenever we are having the new information, it should be added in the CTRI and it should be accessible by the public, so the public knows what kind of trial is being conducted in the country, plus the subject who participated in the trial, to get the better understanding what their trial is all about, they can go to the CTRI portal and see the details about their trial. So that all is to be done in order to rely on the data and to get the approvals from the regulatory authorities. Talking about the principle number 10, that is also new, talks about the roles and responsibility in the clinical trial should be clear and documented appropriately. So the sponsor, we know. So when we are talking about the transferring of the responsibility, we are addressing to the sponsor. And when we are talking about delegation of the responsibility, we are addressing to the investigator. So the sponsor can transfer or the investigator can delegate their duties in the trial. So we know that this can be done. But whatever duties are being delegated by the sponsor, maybe to the service providers or the duties that the investigator delegates or to their team members should be clearly documented. Plus, still they need to have oversight, means they need to supervise the trial related activity as per the proportionality risk-based approach. Means the areas where the risk is higher, those activities should be more taken care of by the sponsors and similarly for the investigators. So the agreement should be stating clearly the roles and the activities that are being transferred by the sponsor to any service providers and the tasks that are being transferred. So service providers, as we have already discussed, the CROs will know more the term will be used. It will be the service provider. So the responsibility for the conduct of those activity will reside to those service providers as stated in the written agreement. And yeah, so the responsibilities that are not being stated in the agreements will still be held by the sponsors and the investigator. Okay. So in short, it says that whatever responsibility the sponsors and the investigator transfer or delegate should be in writing in a written agreement, but still the sponsors and the investigators holds the responsibility of appropriate oversight, the supervising those activities as per the proportionality risk-based approach. Coming to the last principle of ICH revision 3, talks about the IP. So this is also not new, but this is also pulled up as one of the principles in the revision 3. So we know that the investigational product used in the clinical trial should be manufactured as per the standards of GMP. So for the good manufacturing practices, the drug needs to be manufactured and managed in accordance with the product specification and the drug product. So the manufacturing of the drug should be done as per the standards of GMP, and the protocol should state that how the drug dispensing will be done during the trial. The labeling of the drug will be as per the regulatory requirement of the country, and the IP provided to the participant should retain its quality. They should be told to the subject how the subject should store the drug so that the drug maintains its shelf life, the drug retains its quality and does not get deteriorated. Then the processes should be stated in the protocol, like how the drugs will be handled during the trial, how the drug will be stored with the limited access, with the controlled environmental condition, how the drug will be dispensed during the trial, and how the drug will be, the dispensing records will be maintained, how the drugs will be returned back or destroyed by the trial site as instructed by the sponsor. So all these processes will be stated in the protocol, and the shipment detail will also be the important documents that is for reconciliation of the shipment products that is being sent with the product that is present at the trial site. So these were the 11 principles in the revision 3 of ICHS. Then the Annex 1 talks about the IRB. So we know earlier also so yeah. So IRB comes under the Annex 1 as per the new structure of the revision 3. So what is new is related to the submission and communication in revision 3, added global language about reporting of IRB and regulatory authorities. So this was not there in revision 2, but is being added in the revision 3. Rest all the responsibilities that the IRB holds in the revision 3 are being transferred in the revision 2 is being transferred in the revision 3 as well. So in some region, it's like here in some region, the investigator has the power or has the access for the regulatory authorities submissions as well. So we know that mainly the investigators are doing the submissions to the ethics committee, and the regulatory authority submissions are being done by the sponsor, but in some region the investigators can do the submission to the regulatory authorities as well. So let's see what are the new things in the IRB responsibilities that is being added. So assent material, that is important. Assent we know is the material that we use for the minors. Minors are the children who are participating in the trial. That is the assent that to whom so in India, the children who are below the age group of 18 who has not attained the legal age are considered assent, and the material that we use for the assent trials, like the investigational product or the documents, assent form. So the informed consent form in case of children is known as assent. So all those materials need to be submitted to the ethics committee, how the informed consent will be done. So all these documents need to be submitted to the regulatory authority for their review and approval. So now here also, earlier the the ethics committee is reviewing the chart in a timely manner. But now the review will be done as per the proportionate risk-based approach. This means if the risk is higher in the trial, the frequency of review will be more. And if the risk is low, then the review timeline can be exceeded. In case of minor, we still follow in India. We know that when the minors researches are being conducted, we need to explain the research to the minor to their level of understanding as per their age, as per their maturity level. These documents are being developed and are being explained to the minors. So we know that anyone who is participating in the trial, so the subjects, if they don't have that mental capacity to have that much of understanding, still the study will be explained to them to their level of understanding. So for that, we have the assent form, which will be developed as per the understanding or the age group in which the trial needs to be carried out. Then they're talking about the IRB payments in a timely manner. Then, yeah, one more thing that is being added. So here it says that the travel expenses that the subjects, the participants are getting in the trial or for their stay, that is not considered to be the coercive act. Okay, so that is not some sort of the kind that which is allowing the subject to motivate the subject to participate in the trial. So here it mainly says that the travel expenses, the stay money that is being given to the subject for their participation should be just the right amount so that the subject is not at any losses and they are not paying from their pockets for the research. So that needs to be still needs to be reimbursed in the trial, and that is not considered to be any sort of incentives for subjects. Then in the composition, we said that one member whose primary area of interest is not in medical sciences should be included. Then again, the expedited review, this was already there, so nothing new is being added here. So this is also not new. This is also a routine practice that we are doing. And all the results that is, or the approvals that is being given by the IRP will be communicated in the paper-based document or electronic. Approvals can be granted. All the details. One more change that is being done in the IRB. Earlier we said that the IRB also need to retain the document after completion of the trial for certain period of time. So now this is being removed. The timeline for maintaining the records has been removed, and this is made as per the regulatory requirements within the country. According to that, years the documents will be retained by the ethics committee on completion of the trial. So in the next one, we also include about the investigator. So let's see what are the new that is being added in the revision 2. Also, we talked about the responsibility of the 13 responsibility of the investigator. So the same responsibilities are here, but more on the oversight part that is being changed. So one more thing that is being changed in the investigator is the definition of the investigator. So earlier we said that the investigator is a person who is going to conduct the clinical trial, and yeah. So now here the change that is being made is the person who is responsible for the conduct of the trial, including the trial participants for whom the person has responsibility during the conduct of the trial. Okay, so earlier we said that the investigator is a person who is responsible for the conduct of the trial at the trial site. But now it is being modified to the definition that the person who is going to be responsible for the conduct of the trial, including the trial participants for whom that person has the responsibility during the conduct of the trial, will be known as investigator. Again, the trial site will now be called as investigator site. So earlier we said that the trial site is a location where the trial-related activities need to be conducted. Now it is being changed and it says that the location where the trial-related activities will be conducted and coordinated under the investigator oversight. So why the term coordinating the activities is being stated is because now we are going to talk about the decentralized activities. So the trial activities that are not being carried out at the centers, how those activities will be supervised. So still it says that if some of the activities that are not being conducted at the trial site, maybe the sponsor has delegated those activities to some of the maybe nursing institution. So on behalf of the investigators, those uh, under the supervision of the investigator, those activities will be carried by the third parties. But still, the investigator need to supervise those activities, should see the source data that will be collected, should supervise the essays that takes place. So here, this is a new thing, talks about the decentralization where some of the trial activities can be carried out in other location other than the trial site. So those activities should also be stated in an agreement, and the supervision of those activities or the oversight of those activities will be taken care of by the investigator. So these are the duties that is being the 13 duties that we'll be talking about the investigator. Responsibility is. So we know that the investigator is being delegated the responsibility of carrying out the trial-related activities. So with the help of the team, the investigators carry out the trial-related activities under their oversight, under their supervision. So all the duties that are being delegated will be stated in the record in the delegation law that we have, or the responsibility law. We'll talk about the responsibilities, and those responsibilities will be supervised or oversight by the investigator. So here also the proportionate risk-based approach is being applicable. So what is the new change that is being given? So just give me a minute, I'll take a water break. Okay. So what I mean to say here related to the delegation. So in the delegation law, we talk. So let's see, understand this with the example. So we know that in the trial related activities that are being delegated to the concerned person need to be documented in the delegation or the responsibility law. So now the few first bit flexibility is being given here, that the tasks that are being carried out as a routine activity, and that is nothing new. Those activities is not necessary to be delegated in the delegation law. That activities can be mentioned in any of the alternative documents, but not really important. For example, the pharmacist dispensing a locally registered. Okay. So if the pharmacist is giving the drug that is already registered, okay, and that is nothing new for the pharmacist. This is the routine clinical practice for the pharmacist. So in that case, we don't provide any training to the pharmacist, and there's no need for the pharmacist name to be there in the delegation law. And this activities requires, and if the pharmacist has experience, and this is the routine activity that is being carried by the pharmacist, the less oversight means less supervision is required, because the pharmacists are already carrying out these activities on routine basis, well trained and well experienced. So this activity does not need to be included in the delegation law. Similarly, the pharmacist who is dispensing the unregistered drug. So if the drug is unregistered, in that case, in the delegation law, it is required to be documented that this unregistered drug will be dispensed by the pharmacist. So this is an unregistered drug. So for that case, the pharmacist need the training, and the pharmacist is not well experienced in that. So in that case, the training is required, and the investigator need to have a more oversight on this activity. Similarly, for the research nurses, the practice that they are carrying out on routine basis in the clinics, like measuring the blood pressure. So for these activities, if they are going to perform in the trial as well, for that they don't require the additional training, and there's no need to enter that activity into the delegation log, and the less supervision is required by the investigator on the activity of the task. On the other side, if the research nurse is taking the questionnaire, and that is a part of the research, this is not the routine practice that is being carried out. So for that processes, the training will be required, and the investigator need to supervise those activities more. So in short, it says that the routine practices that are being carried out by the different team members, if it's a routine activities, it does not require training unless oversight is required. But if it's new and it is being carried for the first time, those activities need to be documented in the delegation law, and more supervision is required. So the training will be provided for the task that really important is really new, and that is not the routine practice. For them, the training will be provided, and those tasks will be oversighted by the investigator. So these points we have covered in this slide. Then talking about the service provider, so we talked that providing service providers will be the one was going to provide the services either to the sponsor or to the investigator to fulfill the trial-related activities like the CROs, vendors, central labs, IRT providers, home nursing providers. So they will be called as service providers. So sponsor will be assisting with identifying. So this is what I was explaining, that if some of the services will be fulfilled by the sponsor on behalf of the investigator, then the sponsor will be helping the investigator to avail those service from the service providers, like the use of home nurse can be taken with the help of the nursing agencies, the service providers. The sponsor can provide those services to the investigator, but the investigator will be the right person to do the final selection whether the service provider is suitable or not. So agreements will be made by the investigators. So this is not a very stringent one that the agreement should talk about that the investigators, service providers, and the sponsored agreement should be made. But the sponsor, if providing the services to the investigator from any service provider, the sponsored investigator agreement, if it talks about that, it is completely fine. But if your sponsor is okay to do and go ahead with having the agreement, that will be the best thing to stay in more compliance and to have the clarity on the expectations and the duties that are being transferred. So, if the investigators, suppose if we are talking about the decentralized services, so in that case, if the nurses need to go and dispense the drug to the trial participants at their location, in that case, the investigator will be oversighting on those activities. And like now, so with the help of the informed consent can also be decentralized. The training can be given. So now the consent can be done remotely as well. So if those activities are being carried out, the investigator need to still have the oversight, means they need to see the source document, whether the information is properly documented or not. If any serious adverse event occurred, they need to get the information and accordingly act for the service providers. So in short, whatever service providers services the service providers are providing to the investigators, those services will be supervised by the investigator, and whenever appropriate actions are required, they can be looked into. Then the protocol compliance, this is nothing new for us. We know that all the protocol deviations need to be reviewed, and accordingly, the corrective action and the preventive action, the CAPA, needs to be written. In the deviation also, we need to categorize like what deviations are the ones who are going to impact more on the quality of the data as well as the safety. So that all is being included here in then providing the medical care. So this also we talked in the definition that the medical care is not just limited to the investigators. So the other healthcare professionals like the nurses, the pharmacists, the general practitioners, the GPs will also be responsible for the overall medical care of the subject. Then the reporting guidelines the reporting will be done by the investigators. Whenever required, whenever they see occurs, the reporting will be done. Now, this consent part, this is important to have an understanding that the informed consent mode can now be done electronically. This means now instead of paper-based consent process, we can use the electronic. We can take the consent from the patients electronically as well. So electronic consent is allowed, but this does not mean that the copy paste of the images of the signatures can be used, or the signature stamps, or this date stamps can be used. No. So this should be done in a proper way, and no signature images should be picked and should be used for electronic consent, because we don't have the audit trail to cross check and see for its validity or its authenticity. So now the informed consent can be carried out by using the images, by using the videos. The consent process can be kept out. So, but still the paper format should be available for maybe the old age people who are not very friendly with the technology. Maybe they messed up with that. So in that case, we should also have the paper-based format document. So wherever the electronic consent can be used, we can use those. And wherever the paper format is required, we can use the paper format as well. So remote consenting is allowed. Okay, so then the verification of identity. So this should still be there if we are carrying out the consent process remotely. Still, the authenticity, the identity of the participant and the LAR needs to be verified. The impartial witness can also be used remotely. Electronic signatures. Yeah, so we have explained this. No image copy paste images can be used in place of signatures. No stamps for dates and signatures should be used. So for reconsenting also, this is a new thing that is being added, and it is quite good as well. When we talk about reconsent, earlier we said that whenever new information comes up, we need to revise the informed consent, take the IRB approval, and then take use the consent to reconsent from the subject. The subject was always reconsented. So if in the trials we did the modification to the consent form 10 times, so 10 times we need to take the reconsent from the subject, that they are well aware about the new information that has been added. But now the change is that you don't need to take the reconsent if it is not impacting the subject. Okay, so if the change is very minor, is not related to the safety of the subject, but it is not very relevant to the subject's participation, in that case, we don't require to take the reconsent from the subject. If suppose the subject is in the last visit and the changes are being made for the visit one now. So for that patient, that is not very relevant information. So in that case, if you don't take the reconsent for that subject, it is completely fine. So minors, this is very important that the minors, the children who have not attained the legal age of 18 years in India will be considered as minors in the research, and the consent form for the minors is known as assent form. So the assent form will be used for consent, for taking the consent from the subject, from the minors, from the children, to their level of understanding. This document is being simplified. This does not mean that we are not going to take the parent consent. Assent is to make sure that the subjects, the children knows that in what kind of research they are participating to their level of understanding. Like in the case of children, we say that in the case of benefit, we use the term what will be good for you. In case of risk, we use the term what is not good for you, what is bad in the research. So these kind of the terminologies that the child can understand to their age group, the assent form needs to be simplified. Plus, there will be a parental consent form where the parents should also agree that the child, they are allowing their child to participate in the trial, but plus the child should also agree that they are giving that they are okay to participate in the trial. So when this joint discussion is being confirmed, then only the child participation in the research will be confirmed. So otherwise, this is not an asset. And if the child who participated in the research, suppose we are doing the research for the children age group of 12 to 18 years. So if the child attains the legal age, in that case, we are going to, so suppose the trial is maybe for 17 to 20 years, and when the child participated in the research, the child was 17 years. Now the child is 18 and the child has attained the legal age. So in that case, the child is going to sign the consent form. The complete study will be explained to the subject, and the child decision will then matter that whether the child want to participate in the trial or not. The parents' decision will be overruled as the child attained the legal age. And these are the elements of the informed consent that we already. So, in the interest of the time, we are just going to cover the important things. Otherwise, you will whole day you'll be sitting with me. So coming to the investigational product management. So what facility? So in this also, the investigator can delegate the duty of the investigation product management to the team of experienced member, but they still need to have an oversight. Again, the professionality risk-based approach will be followed as per the risk that is involved in with the investigational product, the route through which the drug is being given. So if the route is supposed oral, less um, monitoring or less oversight is required. It is being injectable oversight is required. And if we are doing the trial at the early phase with the investigational product, more oversight is required in the later stages. So according to the proportionality risk-based approach, this will also be applicable in the investigation product management, and this is proportionality risk-based approach will be applicable throughout the guideline. This is the decentralized element. So if suppose the drug that is being used for the purpose of the trial is being shipped to the location where the subject stays, or to the subject's location, maybe to their home, the drug needs to be sent, or to the if the drug cannot be taken directly by the subjects, then the home nurses services is availed, or if that is not, then in that case to the near healthcare centers, the drugs will be sent. In that case, also the investigator need to oversight that and that the drugs are being properly dispensed to the subject by the healthcare dealers or the healthcare professionals. Yeah, so when the subject wants to withdraw, it's not like whatever data we have, we are just going to throw that data. We're not going to utilize that data. So whatever data we have collected from the patient should be utilized, and the effort should be made that the subject is able to be retained in the study instead of the subject leave the study. So if the subject wants to leave the study, we should go for the approach to know what are the challenges that the subject is facing in the research, and we make sure that more flexibility is being provided. Suppose the subject says that in the timings they are not okay, it's their working hours and taking the work off coming for the trial. This is not feasible. So in that case, we can go with the approach that we can arrange their visits on the weekends or in the late evenings, whatever suits them. So the main objective should be for retaining and not losing the participants. And if in case still the participants wants to leave the study because of some serious adverse event or because of some intercurrent illness that the subject has developed, in that case, the data that needs to be collected for the final discussion or the final conclusion that the data, how that data will be collected, what follow-up visits will be required, should be stated in the protocol, and those procedures need to be followed. Yeah, so transparency, the trial results should be given to the subject. One more thing that has been added new is that when the investigator participates in the study, now the investigator need to give the detail about the location as well as the sources from where they are going to record the patient's data. Okay, so the source records from where the information will be collected in the research, as well as where those source records will be kept. That information should be stated. Okay, and what will be the method of data capture, whether it will be an electronic data capture, paper data capture, that those records will be kept. This all should be in line before the trial starts. And the definitions are also being updated. So we are no more going to call it as a source document or source data, because we are collecting the information in paper as well as electronic. So now the common term that will be used will be source records. Then talking about the privacy and the confidentiality. So that should be taken care of. So all the data that is being sent to the sponsor should be the coded data. The unique identification code should be assigned to the information that is being sent by the trial site to the sponsor. Yeah, so if the data is being collected in the software application, then the access should be limited, or no unauthorized access should be given, so that data cannot be altered or destroyed or missed out or can be fabricated. And information about who is going to be responsible for maintaining the essential record during the retention period should also be stated. So coming to the sponsor's responsibility. So that is also the part of Annex 1. So earlier said that as per the revision to the responsibility that was there, it's about coming to the sponsor's responsibility. So the sponsor's oversight and the resources, this was not existing in the earlier guidelines in the revision, but now we have added more information towards the sources and the oversight or the supervision of the sponsor. So again, the trial design, when we are designing the trial, we should be incorporating sufficient information on the safety and efficacy of the data to support human exposure. And the inputs from the interested parties, like the stakeholders, the stakeholder term has been replaced by the interested parties. Okay, so now we are not going to use the term stakeholders. Instead of that, we are using the term interested parties. And again, fit for purpose, operation should be carried out, data acquisition tool. So this is new. That is terminology that is being added, which talks about the different ways of the data be collected. So talking about this later. So no unnecessary data should be collected. So no unnecessary burden should be put on the investigator. That is also one of the objectives, that no unnecessary burden on the investigators and the subjects. Sufficient information, sufficient resources should be there to conduct the trial. The agreement should be in writing, and all the changes of the duties that the sponsor delegates transfers to the other service provider should be reflected in the written agreement. So we know who the service provider is. So the investigator, so they should have an agreement in place with the investigator, what all services they are going to avail from them, or for the investigators, what services the sponsor wants to avail. And the rest of the information should be there in the protocol. And so all that you already know is by already existing in the principles of sponsors. Then what is important, so sponsors oversight, this is new, so I'm just focusing more on this. So the sponsor oversight is important, which talks about that the sponsor should look or have more supervision related to the trial results, related to the subject participants, and related to taking the decisions whenever any issues arises. And accordingly, they need to supervise. So the main areas where they need to supervise is the results, the safety of the subject, and the decision making. So there are two terms that we use. One is the risk, one is the issue. When we talk about the risk, we say that this way, what can go wrong, that we earlier already evaluate as per the risk-based monitoring. We already identify the risk, evaluate, and we try to control it, so that if it still occurs, we need to report it. So this is what we follow for the risk management. And when we talk about the issues are what went wrong. So this is the way to control and mitigate the risk. But if the risk already occurs, this is the sponsor's responsibility in a timely manner to escalate and to follow those issues. Then the ITMC should be there to review the safety and efficacy data and to recommend the sponsor whether the trial requires modification or needs to be discontinued if the safety and efficacy issues are being predicted by the ITMC. Then carrying out the quality assurance audit monitoring is also the responsibility of the sponsor. So selecting the monitor, the CRAs is the responsibility of the sponsor. I mean, the sponsor, the CRS should not be involved in the case. So this was not very strictly followed, but now it says that the monitors, the CRS should not be involved in clinical conduct because we cannot judge our own mistake if we are being guided for that. This means that third party is required to see the conduct. The investigator side monitoring will be on the risk-based, proportionate risk-based approach again. And if the risk is higher, then more frequency of the monitoring is required. Frequency monitoring can be carried out in a hybrid model that on-site and the remote monitoring can be combined and it can be carried out. And remote and secure. Yes. This is there, then the IT management will want to know what's the sponsor's responsibility to get the drugs manufactured, supply the drugs to the investigator, get the complete information about the investigation product in the investigator brochure. Then how to maintain the blinding, how to do the unblinding. Then how to handle the data, how the subject will withdraw, what all ways the data will be captured. So all the data handling is the responsibility of the sponsors and is being covered in detail in the guidelines. So today we just going to the overview. In the interest of this time, we are just highlighting the important. Then the data of higher criticality with all the data that we say is of higher criticality. The first one, data of the patient, the medical history of the patient, informed consent dates, dosing, and administration safety and efficacy data is considered to be the critical data in the trial. Then coming to the report keeping, so there should be agreement again, and the final reports of the clinical study will be. Okay, so in the interest of the sum and time, I need to quickly wrap up this session. So before I just, so I'll just quickly tell you about the data governance, which is one of the very important part that is being included in the revision 3. So data governance, when we talk about, so we talk about the data integrity. So data integrity is the quality and the reliability of the data. So as per the principle of FOR, that says that the data should be attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, complete, secure, as well as reliable. And data acquisition tools are the tools that are being used for collecting the data in the trial. So the data can be collected in the paper-based document or in the using the electronic tools. So data acquisition tools, also known as that, in which we can collect the data in the electronic CRA from the CRA using IRT technology, using the patient report outcome wearable devices are also being a part to which the data can be collected. Metadata is the data that explains the data. So the additional information that we add to the data is the metadata, and the audit trail is the timestamped information that is being present in the system, which cannot be modified and deleted. So when we talk about the metadata, we say that the metadata gives the more information to the data. So if I write 135, can you tell me whether it's the height, its weight, its blood pressure, or its sodium level? Right. You cannot tell me what 135 is. So if I add that 135 refers to the systolic blood pressure, it is being measured in mmHg, it is in numeric, this is the range. So you know that I am talking about the blood pressure. Its range is its unit, the devices to which it can be measured. So this additional information that we have added to the data is referred to as metadata. Then we have the data lifecycle that starts where that how the data will be collected, how the data will be reviewed, how the data will be reviewed, and if any issues are there, how the data will be corrected, how the data will be transferred, in a secure manner. So the risk, well, what is the risk involved with the transferring of the data and how to mitigate that, how to oversight those risks that is being added and how to retain those documents. Finally, how to destroy the documents, and the complete process is being there in detail in the guideline. Then we talk about the computer system, so which the data will be collected. The staff who's going to use this data system will be trained on that as well. The proper backup should be taken, 24/7 backup should be there for the data. Limited access should be provided, proper training should be given, and periodic testing should be done. Then come the investigator and their responsibilities. So in the it's me just quickly tell you now. The additions that in the investigator's brochure, the details that was being added is the reference safety information is being referred to as a list of adverse reactions that are being added to the investigator brochure. The document which gives the complete information about the investigation. Then coming to the appendix B, which talks about the protocol. So, what is a protocol? It's a document which in detail describes the actions that needs to be carried out during the trial. So in this also, the approach is being made that not much unnecessary data collection process should not be there. So that we can avoid the burden on the investigators as well as on participants. All the items that are really important for the quality, for proving the quality and safety of the process of the data should only be collected. And yeah. Then comes essential documents. These are the important documents. And there's also the management of essential documents. And the records have been added new. So essential documents has been replaced by the essential record terminology, source data, and the source document terminology is being replaced by the source record. So in this, all the data that needs to be kept in the trial master file, the location details should be shared, and the data like the source document and the which are being kept outside the trial master file. The detail about the location and the version history should be maintained for the identification of this data is being added. And the glossary is there. So when the ICHG is speaking, it has 62 terminologies. In the revision 2, we added 3 more terminologies in now. These are the new terminologies that are being added in the revision 3. Okay, and these are the changes that is being made. So the subject is now, no, we are not going to use the term subject. We are going to use the term trials participants. CRO will be called as service providers. These terminologies are being removed from the guidelines, and these are the new terminologies that are being added. So source records, GCP we have discussed. The slide quickly. The essential documents will be data will be called as records, items, details, investigator definitions we have discussed, investigator site will be known as investigator site, investigation product. A few the terminologies are being added. So that was all a quick overview of the revision 3 guideline. And, thank you so much. Thanks for your patience. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shweta ma'am, for this extensive session on IC at GCP. Only you can speak for 2 hours and everything is so clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We can take, if anyone has some questions, we can take those questions. If so, for the certification, I have dropped my number. So if you want the certificate for this session, we are giving the certificate. You can just drop your name, email ID, and WhatsApp number on the chat on my WhatsApp number. I'll put that again. And if somebody has questions, we can take up the questions also. We can either take the questions. If you can raise hand, we can allow you to unmute. Or if you want to put the questions in the chat box also, we can do that. The chat box is open now. If somebody has any questions, can take up, you can share your questions regarding the clinical research. If anyone has doubts, can raise hands. Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for attending the session. You'll be receiving you'll receiving the certificate shortly. You can drop us a message. I am dropping my number here. Feel free to connect with us regarding the clinical research programs, pharmacovigilance, clinical data management programs. We'll be happy to assist you with the programs and the placements as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone.